Good morning, everyone. I'm using a new tool this morning. I'm using Google Hangouts to record. So we'll see how it goes. Let me know if you have trouble seeing the screen or if you have trouble hearing me or if anything doesn't work, because I haven't actually done this. All right, so today I wanted to talk to you about survey design. I wanted to share my notes with you. I kind of begin the survey design process, and I want to show you an example and give you some additional resources. So basically, I'm just going to be walking you through my notes page, and I'll make sure that I make that accessible for you. All right, so your first consideration, let me make sure this is, yep, looks like it is showing. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. All right, so the first consideration is for you to decide if a survey even makes sense for your study. What I find is that people overuse surveys. I think that people use surveys because they're convenient. You don't actually have to go sit down and talk with people. Maybe people aren't actually accessible, especially giving people electronic surveys. You can just email it to them. But I don't find that this is always the best methodology, especially if you're getting started. And so I've shared with you on course materials just a website that will walk you through. This is actually a program evaluation website, but since program evaluation is a type of case study, and since a lot of you are working with programs, I thought it might be helpful. So let me just pull it up. It is the OERL, and I can't tell you off the top of my head what that stands for. I don't remember. But basically, when you're thinking about doing a survey, your first step is to identify the broad goals and questions that underlie your evaluation. And I would say you can replace the word evaluation for study, right? You want to think about the groups from whom you need to get information. And then you want to justify the use of a questionnaire or a survey in your study. So those are kind of the three things that you want to think through. So let's look at step one first. All right, so step one, it says everything in an evaluation must proceed from an evaluation's goal. Remember, switch out evaluation for study or for your research. Where do you find your research goals? How do you know what the basis is for your research? Well, that's your research questions. They're driving everything. So you want to take a look at that. And so, does whatever your evaluation question or your research question, does it point you to the need for doing a survey? Can you actually answer your question, your research question, through conducting a survey? And definitely come back and read this closely. I'm just giving you kind of the high points. The second step is to identify the groups from which you need information. You want to make sure that you're getting the survey to the actual right people, the people that will actually help you answer the questions. And then you want to determine, and this is probably the most important step, it gives you three criteria that you should look at to see if a survey actually will work for you. So the first criteria, the members of the population must be able to give useful information on the issues. And then they give you some questions to think about. Do they have opinions on the issues that interest you? Are they qualified to give you facts and informed judgments? I mean, will they actually be able to answer the questions that you want them to answer? And are they the best or the only source of information? Is this the targeted group? Criterion B, this is really, really important, and a lot of people miss this. It says you must have a clear idea of the variables you want to gather data about, and you need to be reasonably sure you will get those data by posing standardized questions. A lot of times at the beginning of the study, especially for qualitative research, you just don't, but we don't know what the variables are. That's why we're needing to kind of explore this a little bit, which is why a survey in a lot of instances is not a good option. You have to really have a strong sense of what you want to know from people and how to really design, these kind of closed-ended type of questions. Now, some of you are using open-ended questions. So it's kind of like you're sending people interview questions via an electronic format. That's a little bit different because you're allowing them to kind of have open response. But if you're doing a closed-ended, if you're using a Likert scale, any of those types of things, you really need to be solid on what it is you're asking people. So my recommendation, especially if you want to do this kind of closed-ended type of survey, is to not do a survey and do a focus group or do an interview for this class. In the fall, you're going to have to collect another type of data, and you could do a survey at that point in time, unless you already have a really good sense of, again, what your variables are and what you're going to ask people. But otherwise, I think you would get much better data if you sat down with some folks and you talk to them. What you find out on that interview will help you develop the survey questions. But it just takes a lot of planning. Not saying it can't be done, but just be prepared to do some really deep theoretical work. Some of you are at different stages. You're more advanced with your knowledge of the theory, your understanding of the theory, all those kind of things. That would make it easier, because you really have to know the phenomenon to develop a solid survey. Again, not saying it can't be done, but just know that if you're just dipping your toe into this, creating a survey, especially a well-designed survey, is going to be challenging. All right, and then criterion C, you believe the respondents can be relied on to give you the information you need, perhaps with incentives. So you don't have to give people incentives, but if you're doing something and people are totally disconnected and they don't know who you are, a lot of times your survey response rate is going to be pretty low. So definitely think about how you're going to get people to actually buy in and decide to take this. Sometimes it's helpful if you have somebody else kind of vouch for your survey. Like if you have maybe a gatekeeper in an organization and they tell people, who you are, to expect the survey, why it's important that they fill it out, that kind of thing, that might also help your response rates. All right, so that's kind of just some things to think about when you're deciding, should I do a survey or not? All right. All right, so decide if a survey makes sense for your study. Oh, I like this. I can edit as I go. Number 2, if a survey is a good choice, unpack your research question. What theoretical supports do you need to help you build your survey? So I've created a special research question just for the purposes of demonstrating how to create a survey. So here's my research question. How did EDU 7285 support adults learning case study research? So that's this course. So if I wanted to do a study of this course and figure out, how did adults learn? Well, the first thing I want to do is kind of unpack the keywords in this. So what are the keywords? And I have them listed right here. EDU 7285, that's a keyword. Adults learning, case study research. So for all 3 of these things, I need structures that are going to help me determine what my research or what my survey questions are going to be. At this point, you don't want to just start pulling things out of your head because you're going to miss something. But you need some kind of structure, some type of organization system. And so you're going to need to build a taxonomy or an organization planning system for to help you build your survey questions. And your taxonomy is going to be built based on those key words, those key ideas that your research question is formed around. So I need a structure for 7285, for this idea of adults learning, and then for case study research. So I'm going to pull on adults learning. How do I know what adults need to learn? Well, off the top of my head, I think that adults like things to be relevant. So maybe I'm just going to focus on being relevant, except that there's all these other things related to adult learning that I just don't know. I don't have that knowledge in my head. I need to go get some theory that will help me really know what it is that adults need for their learning. And so I'm sure at this point, all of you are familiar with andragogy, you're familiar with Knowles and adult learning theory. So I'm going to pull on his theory to help me kind of start planning out that particular piece of my survey. So I just borrowed this from this particular website right here that I've listed just to make things easy for me. For your survey, of course, you're going to go directly to the primary source for your theoretical framework. You're going to go to the primary sources and you're going to pull the information that you need for your theory. But here are the four, there should be four things that andragogy is built around. Adults need to be involved in the planning and evaluation of their instruction. Experience provides the basis for learning activities. Adults are most interested in learning subjects that have immediate relevance and impact to their job. And adult learning is problem-centered rather than content-oriented. So going back to my research question, when it says how did the course support adult learning, I need to keep all of these things in mind as I'm building out questions related to this idea of adults learning case study research. In other words, I need to find out, were the adults actually, helping plan and evaluate their own instruction? Was it relevant? Things like that. And this is just kind of like a big simplification, but the idea is that you need theoretical structures to help you plan all this out. So here I have just a simple chart. This is the beginning of my taxonomy. I have a theoretical principle, and then I have the theoretical principle in practice, and then I have a question. Now, there's multiple ways to build taxonomies. In course materials, there is a notes page, and on that notes page, there are, I don't think I have it up, but on the notes page, it has a taxonomy, and it's a big chart, and it's got that chart broken out. Basically, the idea is that you start with a big idea and you break it into a smaller idea and a smaller idea and a smaller idea until you get to the point where you can create a question about it. But the idea is that you're going to have to show the ideas from whence your questions are coming from. Everything should be aligned. So this is just a really simple, quick tool way to do that. Depending on what you're studying, you may need additional columns, right? So the example that's on Blackboard, you're going to see multiple columns, multiple breakdowns of these concepts into survey questions. And so this is a really important piece, because what I find is typically people create a survey, they just start pulling questions out of their head, and there's no organization or structure to it. So you just want to be able to prove that rationale for your questions, and you want to make sure that you're doing a thorough job of hitting everything, and having a plan really helps you do that. All right, so I start unpacking the third principle. It says experience provides the basis for learning activities. Well, then I have to think, okay, well, where would they have this experience in their learning activities? And so then I go to the course, and there's all of these places where they might be able to have experience as the basis for their learning activities. The discussion board, the overview of case study, data collection guides. These are all of the assignments and the key things that you're doing in the course. And so then if you come over here and take a look at the questions, I have to go through each of these pieces. So first the discussion board, and then I have to create a question that allows me to ask if experience was actually providing the basis for learning activity. So question: when I was encouraged to post the materials I needed for feedback on the discussion board assignments. All right. Next question: I was able to choose a case study topic that was of interest to me. See, that aligns with the second question, or the second principle in practice. The next question related to data collection guides. So I was able to select a data collection tool that was relevant to my experiences. Notice everything is going back to this idea of experience, because that's something related to adult learning that I wanted to pull on. So the way that you use your theory to structure it may look a little bit different depending on what your research question is. So I'm not saying that this is exactly the way to do all of it, but I'm just trying to give you an example of how you should be thinking through the pieces of a survey. All right, so data collection guides, data analysis. But notice that everything that's there, I have to make sure that I have a question for it. So again, this is probably a gross simplification, but this is just to get you started. And this is an introductory level course. If you really wanted to design, there's tons of resources. There's tons of books. There's just a lot available, a lot out there about survey design. So if this is methodology that you actually want to use for, let's say, your thesis, you're going to be doing some kind of independent study to really make sure that you're on the right track in terms of knowing how to do this. So again, I want to put up a big disclaimer to let you know that there's more detail here, but I just want to kind of get you started with at least thinking through a plan that's aligned, where you're being able to demonstrate where all of your questions are coming from. All right, so that's kind of the adult learning piece of my research question, but I've also got this EDU 7285 piece and the case study research. Excuse me. So I'm not going to get into the case study research, but just I wanted to show you another way to kind of break down this idea of the course. The course has a lot of different pieces, right? So in order for me to develop survey questions, I have to think about, okay, you know, what are the pieces of the course? What are the intended outcomes of the course? And then what are the questions that I would ask? And so this is kind of the beginnings of a logic model to help me think through what are the things that I need to actually be asking about. So for the course readings, as an instructor, I have to ask, okay, what's the point of all those course readings? You know, what was I hoping to see? I was hoping to see an increase in knowledge of how to analyze data, an increase of knowledge of how to design research, an increase of not. So there's all of these outcomes that I'm trying to measure. These are things that are specific, and these are things that are measurable. I can measure an increase, or I can measure a shift. I can measure, you know, a change in opinion, but it's got to be something that's changing so that I can measure it. So then I've got all my outcomes. Each outcome should have questions related to them. So let's see. Increased knowledge on how to analyze data. The course readings help me learn how to analyze qualitative data. That's a survey item. I can ask people if they strongly agree, disagree, you know, strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. Same thing with knowledge of research design. I ask an item about that. So once you take a look at your activities, whatever it is that you're studying, think about, you know, what are those, are there outcomes, particularly for a program? You know, what is the intended outcome of whatever it is that the program is doing? If your program is supposed to be, you know, selling cookies and they're supposed to learn how to sell cookies, then you need to kind of break that process down. Think about, you know, if I wanted to, you know, have my employees learn how to sell cookies, I would have to have a training program. You'd have to break that training program down. You would have to break down, you know, do they have the materials that they need? You know, does the neighborhood matter? You know, there are all of these different pieces. So you really kind of need to create maybe even multiple maps just to get to the point where you know what those activities are. So there's lots of different ways to do this. Now, some of you are not doing like program work. Some of you are exploring things. I know someone's studying like a writing camp, somebody's studying collaboration. Maybe you're studying something and there's not a program or anything that has structures you know, already in place. So in that instance, you're really going to be kind of relying on, you know, your knowledge of the school, as well as you know, the kind of things that are important to that school structure. So you probably want to start off with maybe just a bubble map, thinking about, okay, you know, if I'm looking at student-teacher relationships in the school, you know, where are all those spaces where relationships are going to be important? Do I want to think about relationships in the gym, in the cafeteria, in the hallway, in the classroom? You know, has that covered kind of the entire map of the school and where relationships would be important? And then what kind of theoretical framework can I use to help me structure this idea of, oh, you know, what those relationships would actually entail? So the point is that there's a lot of different ways that you can create an organization system, but you need to create some kind of organization system that's going to help you know that you're asking all of the questions or items that you need to ask, and so that you can demonstrate that you've been thorough and that you haven't just kind of tried to pull questions from here and there. So definitely include the map with the survey. I think I put that in the instructions. The maps can look different. I've given you just, you know, kind of some examples here for how to think things through, but it's going to depend on really what kind of survey you're wanting to use. But the important thing is that you have to have some kind of structure to help you plan out your study or your survey. It can't just be, oh, let me just figure these out. Let me just pull this out of my head. And so as I evaluate that, I need that map so that I can see where, your survey questions are coming from. And that will help me see, well, are there things that you also didn't think about? All right. So once you've thought about, you have a map, I have more here, just me breaking kind of this down. So you can take a look at that later. But once you've done all that, you need to think about response rate. And actually, as you're developing your list of questions over here, you probably have already thought about response. All of my items are developed so that I can use a Likert scale. Strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. Notice they're not written as questions. They're kind of written as statements. The discussion board gave me an opportunity to practice my research design skills. So people can just agree or disagree, in the variety therein. I recommend keeping it simple for participants. You don't want a bunch of different changing scales all over the place because people are going to get confused. So you want to do everything that you can to reduce the burden on your survey participants. There's an article that I posted on Blackboard kind of about the thought process behind surveys for the participant, the person actually taking it. So definitely take a look at that. I also recommend using an even numbered scale. So 4 options or 6 options. Notice I didn't include a neutral. The reason for that is because usually when I do surveys, it's for program evaluation or to make a decision, to inform decision making about something, and the middle option is not helpful. If you're in the middle, it doesn't tell me, it doesn't help me make a decision about which way I should go, which decision I should make. So usually I do 4 options, and I have also seen six options done as well for that reason. So, but there are reasons where the neutral might be important. So I just have kind of a blog article here where they talk about using an odd numbered scale versus an even numbered scale. So definitely check that out as you're making a decision. Make sure if you go with a neutral that you provide a rationale so that I understand why you feel like that's important. Number 5, think about demographics. So usually, you see the questions, what is your race? What is your gender? How much money do you make? What's your education level? Definitely think about which of those questions you want to ask. Go back to your research questions. Which demographics do you need to help you answer your research questions? Which ones matter? If you're doing a survey at a school, does it matter the teacher's gender? Or does it matter the number of years of teaching? Does it matter what subject they teach? The other thing to consider is privacy. If you pull too much demographic information, people are not going to be or feel protected because you'll know exactly who they are. So only put the ones that are necessary. And then you may also consider putting your demographic questions at the end of the survey instead of the beginning of the survey. That way, if people opt out, they've already kind of answered most of the questions that you need. And there are also a couple of other considerations, and I have another blog post here just about designing demographic data. But the key is there should be rationale behind the demographic questions, not just, oh, let me throw these questions in there. And this guy talks about that. 6, determine an order for your survey questions. How are you going to arrange them into the survey? What makes sense based on, your participant? What makes sense based on kind of how the theory builds? 7, copy and paste the questions into the survey builder. I usually use Qualtrics because it's available through the university. If you need access to Qualtrics, I think that students can also get an account. Let me know and I can send you a link. And then you want to create a survey introduction. In the introduction, there should be a title of your survey. You should tell people what the purpose of your survey is, how long it's going to take them, who's the contact person for your survey, who do they contact if something's not working? Do they contact you? Can they email you? Should they call you? And then, what will be done with the survey? So I'm giving you all this information as a participant, but where's it going? Who's it going to? And then I didn't put this, but how's my privacy going to be protected? You should have a statement saying, these results will be summarized and all identifying information will be removed or something like that, just so people know that they're being protected. Or if the survey is anonymous, then tell them it's anonymous. Now, not all surveys are anonymous. In Qualtrics, there's a feature where you can track participants by their email address. And sometimes there's reasons for doing that. So anyway, you want to make sure that you're being honest with participants about what you're going to do to protect their privacy. All right, number 9, format the survey. Make sure that you number the questions, or you number the items, and that you include headings where you can, just to break it up, and that way people know what it is they're answering, what section they're on. And then you want to pilot the survey. Always have at least one other person take it, have another person look at it, read those questions, see if they make sense, see if they don't make sense, so anyway, for the survey, you always want to have somebody else pilot it. Now, for this project, I kind of consider the entire project a pilot. You're trying it out. You're learning to see what you can. Now, just because it's a pilot, does that mean that we're not going to get results that are going to be useful and informational? No, we're going to get useful results. We just know that we're conducting this survey or whatever data collection tool you're using so that you can really learn about the process, improve your research skills, but also you can learn something about the program or whatever phenomenon that you're studying. So the point is never send out a survey cold. Always have somebody look at it. And in this course, I'll take a look at your survey before you send it out. And then your peers also will get a chance to look at it when you post it on the discussion board. So hopefully this gives you a couple things to keep in mind. I'm not going to talk about document analysis, except to tell you that, again, look at your research questions. Think about which documents would be helpful for the data collection. You're literally just collecting the documents or the data that's already been created. The next step is the analysis. And when I do the next lecture on analysis, I'll talk about how you analyze a document. But for now, the survey is kind of the big thing. I'm hoping that this practice will allow you to create better surveys. I find a lot of really bad surveys. So there's the Fowler text that will give you some kind of hints as to, survey rules, things that you want to make sure that you do, types of questions to ask, types of questions not to ask. And then I also posted more resources on the on course materials. It says additional resources for surveys. They're not required, but if you're doing a survey, you want to make sure that you read those things, because as I'm evaluating your survey, I'm going to be using those principles to evaluate it. All right, with that said, hopefully this has been helpful. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I will be in touch soon.